Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the 34th Annual Peer Mediation Conference, Ventures in Peer Mediation. The Peer Mediation Conference is bringing together youth peer mediators for over 30 years now. This is the first year the conference has gone virtual to connect peer mediators around Hawaii and others aspiring to develop their own peer mediation program. And it has been truly wonderful to see people beyond Hawaii joining us. My name is Jose Barzolo from the Matsunaga Institute for Peace at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. This year's Peer Mediation Conference is brought to you as a collaborative of 22 different organizations around Hawaii that support this conference that is spread out throughout the month of April. We are in the last week. The Peer Mediation Conference has consisted of an opening panel, 16 skill workshops, and a closing panel that's coming up this Friday. You can learn more about all the events at matsunagainstitute.eventbrite.com. Today's event is going to focus on launching a successful peer mediation program with Susan Chang. This session will deal with, as Susan put it, fun parts, working directly with students and watching the light bulb go on when they realize they can do this. The venture, organizing and maintaining a viable peer mediation program. This workshop will highlight what the presenter has learned over her time. Since 1989, Sue Chang has trained over 1,000 of school students, public and private, their adult advisors, teachers, support, and administrative personnel, and parents in conflict management techniques such as mediation, negotiation, and managing bullies. Focusing primarily on the elementary school level, Sue also helps organize Hawaii's annual Peer Mediation Conference, and it is really a treat to have her here with us today. So to get us started, I'm going to turn it over to Sue. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Jose. Okay, I'm off and running.
Yep, you're good to go. I think everyone can hear you. So
okay, am I able to see everybody?
You should be able to, and if not, you can put them in grid format. And
okay, how do I do that?
Top right corner, there's a button that says view. If you click on down screen on that, it'll put them in grid format. You can see them that way.
Okay, well, it says speaker view, gallery view,
gallery view. You can do gallery view.
Okay, how's that? That sort of?
If it worked for you, it's good to go.
Okay, is that okay for all of you? Oh, there you are, Tanya. Yep. Now I can see your face. Okay, are we good?
Yes.
Okay, well, welcome. I guess all ladies, am I looking at all ladies? I think I'm looking at all ladies. I'm also, hi, how are you? Okay, hi to all of you. My name is Susan Chang. I think Jose did probably a more excellent job of interviewing me than was introduced me than was rated. But what I'd like to do today, and because there's smaller numbers, I was all set to do this very profound lecture presentation, okay? But because it's just us, I'm going to give you an idea of the types of things I wanted to cover, but I would hope you would feel free to ask questions or make comments or whatever, especially if you've had other experiences or you have other things you want to contribute to the ideas. So we can be a little more informal than my just lecturing, if that works for the rest of you folks. Is that okay? I'm assuming, how many of you folks are here? How many of you folks are located here in Hawaii? Is that all of you or no? Okay. Okay, no, that's fine. The reason I'm asking is because I tend to use, we have some words that we tend to use here in Hawaii fairly often, like, are you all pal or things like that. So what I want to do is be careful that I don't use those words and get confusing. So that's fine. All right, basically what I wanted to cover this afternoon, and as I said, oh, Becky raised hands. Where's Becky? Saw raised anything? Okay, Becky's over here.
Yeah, Becky, if I'm going to just suggest everybody in the audience, if you have a question, you can either put in the chat or you're welcome to unmute yourself. I think her raised hand may have just been because she's in Hawaii. Yeah.
Oh, okay. No, I just didn't want to be rude right off the bat here. Okay, all right. So let me give you a sense of what I wanted to cover. And then if you want to fast forward me or you want to go in another direction, please feel free to say so. I wanted to touch on the fun that I have doing what I've been doing and why I've been doing it for several decades, because I think sometimes that gets lost in the details of organizing a mediation program. So I want to touch on that. And then I wanted to very briefly touch on the history of peer mediation in Hawaii, which probably many of you are already aware. So I would just wanted to be very brief about that because I think there's some lessons to be learned from that. I have some suggestions on things to take a look at when you're thinking about helping a school or any organization organize a peer mediation program. Things to look at when you're actually organizing the mediation program itself, and then finish with some ideas and suggestions about training. So I'm just going to like launch off. And if any of you want to kind of veer in another direction or ask questions or anything, you can do it the Zoomy technology thing, or just let me know. At the end of the discussion today, and hopefully it is a discussion, not just me lecturing, I do have a paper that I had prepared a couple of years ago titled Challenges. If you would like which pretty well captures the points that I want to be making the next few minutes. If you'd like a copy of that, you can just email me and I'm happy to send you a copy of that, email you a copy of that, okay? All right, so I'm just gonna launch off rock and rolling here. And if you want me to, as I said, if you want me to veer off in another direction or you want to comment on it, please feel free to. Obviously, the pandemic has absolutely changed the name of the game for all of us. And I don't need to tell any of you, the impact on our schools has been enormous. My guess is it's going to be a while before things even begin to kind of settle down in the new norm. We're not even sure what's going to happen to the Hawai'i schools. And I have twin grandsons who live in California. They don't know what's going to be happening with them either this coming fall. So when I talk about possibly implementing a brand new program like peer mediation, I'm discussing these things and touching these things with an absolute understanding that nobody may be making eye contact with you in a school for at least 2 or 3 more years. Okay, so just so we're clear about that. Especially if the school has not had a peer mediation program before, they may want to have no discussion about changing anything because they're grappling and wrestling with trying to get things back to somewhat of a norm that was there before. The fun thing for me and why I've stuck with it is that pre-pandemic, when I actually was in a room training the kids, I absolutely love the last role play that we do during the training because I love walking around the room and watching and listening to the kids, putting in my 2 cents whenever it's appropriate, but watching and listening to the kids and realizing that in a relatively short period of time, this room full of kids, for the most part, not all of them, but for the most part, they have a clear understanding of mediation, how mediation might help them and their peers deal with the conflicts that they have to deal with every day. And they might actually be able to do it. And that to me is so fun and so rewarding to see that kind of reaction, because it's not like we're talking about training for 70 years. It's a relatively short period of training. I think the kids, and I should say, I say the kids, but actually my generation, my children's generation, we need to have some ideas on how we can deal with the unrelenting conflicts that are there for us. What we tend to tell kids all the time is that they've got to figure it out, or they need to go tell an adult, or they need to stand up. Okay, those things can all work, but one of the things I've noticed with kids is that they really, really value the thought and the opportunity to explore and create possible different alternative resolutions to their conflicts. And part of the beauty to me of mediation has always been that what the mediators are doing is they are modeling a way for kids to think and structure about managing their conflict. So when I see that the light bulbs are going on during training and they get those connections and they get that maybe they have a little more power to deal with some of these conflicts that they have to deal with, that to me is the fun part. Okay, quick history. In the state of Hawaii, we enjoyed from about 1986 until the mid-90s, we enjoyed the absolute privilege of having a full-time Department of Education person be responsible for peer mediation programs. And the first gentleman that had that role, Carl Takashita, succeeded by Janie King, was a trained mediator with the Mediation Center of the Pacific. And to me, that is like one of the absolute green lights to talking about healthy peer mediation programs. He was able to go into a school or any organization, but go into a school and meet with the people who were thinking about implementing it. He could have all the initial conversations. He could help them set up the details of the program. He could be there for the training. He could be there for the follow-up. And that's just absolutely invaluable, because I think one of the things any of you who've worked with peer mediation programs in schools or other organizations is it takes a lot more organization than we'd like to think it does. It isn't just a matter of training kids or training adults and then we're done already. No, there needs to be some organization. So, okay, before I move into a little more structure, is this okay? Is the rhythm or the direction I'm taking with this conversation okay with all you folks? Is this hoping what you were hearing? Okay, all right. Okay, let me touch on culture and then the methodology for the programs is in my viewpoint. And I'm using culture in the broadest sense. As you all well know, if you've worked with schools at all, is there can be very different cultural focuses within different schools. And this can be true. I'm talking about schools, but it could be Girl Scouts, it could be summer fun, it could be any organizations that are working with kids. And I've worked with college kids and adults, but most of my comments are directed primarily for the elementary, middle, and high school students, just so we're clear about where I'm coming from there. If you've spent any time in the different schools, you'll get a sense of the culture of the school. So when you get approached, if you're somebody who's an independent contractor or somebody who's working with an organization who's not part of that school, one of the first things I strongly urge you to do is have some fairly lengthy conversations where you're doing a lot of listening. What is it about the peer mediation program that they're interested in? What is it that their expectations are? And I'm saying all this, I'm not suggesting you sit there and grill them. That's not what I'm saying, but listen very carefully for how will they measure success of the program? How will they measure failure? Are they looking for a way to model social skills programs that they've already got in place? Is violence totally out of control on their campus and they're hoping that a peer mediation program will help quiet it down? What is it that they're looking for? Because one of the things you'll notice if you've worked with schools at all is that there's tremendous pressure to keep moving, keep moving, keep moving, keep moving, keep moving. And there's also tremendous pressure to succeed. The definitions of success can change every 4 or 5 years. I'm sure any of you who've worked with schools have noticed this. And that's just the reality of it. So you can almost take as a given that when you have your initial conversations with somebody in the school or aftercare or wherever the organization is, they are already probably pretty much stressed to the max already about wanting to succeed what they already have in place. So if you're talking to them about possibly implementing a new program, that's a zero-sum thing. What is it that you're asking them to stop doing so they can implement peer mediation? You rarely are going to get a question that blunt, but when you're listening, listen for that, because it isn't just being able to talk about the wonderfulness of peer mediation. You're also going to be confronting head on the practical need for the school to implement the program and how they're going to go about doing that. So I don't say that to discourage. I don't want to sound like the old lady upstairs, okay? I'm not grouchy about that, but I'm saying that's a reality, because what can happen, and what I've experienced many times, is you can have one person in a school that's all, whoa, peer mediation, this is so cool. And you go through all the jump through all the hoops, and you get through everything, and then after 2 years, it's gone. And a lot of it is because some of the groundwork just wasn't laid out, okay? So, let me just make sure that one of the other things that needs to be really clear is that you need to be sure they really understand what mediation is. And I don't say that to be silly. I don't hear meditation confused as much. I still have heard medication used, but most people really don't know what mediation is. And I'm not saying that they should, I'm just saying they don't. So maybe one of the things that you need to be, I should say, one of the things you really need to be aware of is what their understanding is. Because obviously it makes a huge difference for the kids. And my focus, my emphasis, my concern underlying all the things that I'm saying this afternoon is I want the kids to succeed. If we're going to say a school is going to implement a peer mediation program, we go through the training, we get them all set to go, and they don't have any place to go because the school hasn't quite thought this all through. Oh, no. So I'd rather put the time in up front. Be sure they know what mediation is. What the kids are going to be trained to do is they're not going to be trained to be junior police officers. They're not judges. They're not counselors. They're not therapists. And one of the things that I noticed when working with elementary schools is a lot of times they assume that the mediators will be available during recess and that they'll be implementing the rules of the playground. That's not what they're being trained to do. And one of the running jokes I have with a couple of the schools is there's a reason why mediators are not issued whistles, okay? But it's really important that the school understand that and that the people, the teachers or whoever is working during recess understand that. The mediators are not, okay, let me back up the truck here, I'm sorry. Frequently, elementary school mediators are made available during recess and they work in pairs and they have certain assigned places, certain times and days. That's the most usual way that most frequent use of elementary school mediators. So there's a lot of education that needs to take place. I mean, it's gentle education. I'm not talking about lecturing or wagging your finger or any of that kind of stuff, but it's making very clear to everybody that the kids aren't being issued whistles on purpose. And hopefully there's other ways that they can exercise their skills during recess. The middle school and the high school kids, a lot of the distinction that needs to be very clear and that needs to be said up front is that they're not there to discipline the kids, that the disputants that are sitting with them, sharing what's going on with their conflict and looking for help and trying to figure out how to solve it. That's also very important that gets clarified because it's easier, because it's accurate. And what the adults and the students on campus really need to understand that. The mediators are not replacing the vice principal and discipline. They're there focused on the two or three kids who are having a conflict, and they're trying to help them figure out how they can resolve that conflict or at least manage it for at least the end of the day. Okay, so that's really important. What I find repeatedly is it's really important that get clarified as to what the kids are expected to do and what you need to be sure they're not being asked to do. Okay, before I ramble on anymore, are there any questions or comments or anything you folks want to chime in about the basic? Are we okay? You want me to move along here? Okay. Okay, thumbs up. I'm learning Zoom etiquette. Oh, good. Thank you. Thank you, Tanya. That local thing there. Okay, so that's touching on who decided to implement the program, and that doesn't have to take a lot of time. I'm taking a lot of time to explain, to share some of that information with you, but that's really important. And assuming that that's all those pieces at least somewhat fall into place, there's the actual details of organizing the mediation program itself. So I'm just going to touch on some of these things, and I don't mean to detail you to death, but I think sometimes people jump into these programs, school people, not maybe necessarily us who are helping the school set it up, but I think oftentimes school people jump into these programs because it sounds like a really cool thing to be doing and be really helpful, but they haven't thought through all of the details. And for a mediation program to succeed, or at least to hopefully succeed, there are some detailed things that need to be worked out. Like, for example, how will the mediators be selected? What's the criteria that's going to be used? Some schools want to have all of their top row students trained as mediators. other schools think this is perfect for all the kids who are in trouble all the time, that they would benefit from this. Okay, here's Sue Chang's 2 cents on this, okay? The ideal for me is that if the mediation team, once selected and once trained, is all standing up in a row, that all of the kids in that school can see someone there that reflects them. If you're only choosing top of the line kids, and I should phrase that differently. I don't mean that to be mean. If you're only choosing kids like, this is a reward because they're really excellent students, or you're choosing the ones who are in trouble all the time, I can guarantee you that they're going to have a very difficult time having their peers agree to mediate with them. So it doesn't have to be a perfect blend, but that kind of thing really needs to be thought through. I would strongly suggest, okay, let me back up the chart. Once some decisions are made within the school as to who might be selected, possibly selected for the mediation team, and then I would also strongly urge then, and that gets communicated with the teachers and all, I would strongly urge that there be little interviews, not extensive, but just little interviews, so that the kids, before they go through the training, have an idea of what they just got themselves into. Because for some kids, they're very hesitant. They don't want to be out there in front of their peers. And I think we really need to be respectful of that. That doesn't mean you can't encourage somebody who's a little shyer, that you see the potential. But we need to be sure that the kids who are on that team have a very good chance of succeeding. Otherwise, it's not fair to them. At the very least, it's not very fair to them. Okay, so once the decisions have been made as to how the kids are going to be selected, and some schools, and I should say on the side here, some schools actually leave it as voluntary. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, we have a question from Andrea.
Yeah, Andrea, go ahead.
I don't want to ruin your flow, but I have a question before we leave that area. I know that it's contextual, and I'm hearing you say that, you know, it requires a lot of different dialogues with a lot of different stakeholders. Do you have some examples that you want to share about how you recruited? In other words, how you advertised, or how you welcomed, like before you get to the interviewing process and selection process with the kids? What are some things that worked in order to invite them in?
Okay, I'll answer that the best I can in terms of, it starts with the teachers. It starts with the adults on campus. I would suggest initially that you spend a lot of time with the adults. I always make a formal faculty presentation before any of the detail stuff gets really worked out, because they need to be supportive. If they're going to pull against some of the thinking, then it's not going to help the kids. So it starts with and sometimes even just having a dialogue with some of the teachers, the key teachers, what you're thinking. How do you think best that this will succeed? Then it's up to the school to decide. Do the counselors how do you announce that there's going to be a new program? Is it an announcement that's made in the cafeteria? Are there posters that go up? I mean, how are you going to handle announcing the program and what it's going to be like? So, and then because the decision is going to have to be made, is it going to be open to anybody who wants to apply and then will be screened? Or is it the first year only going to be referrals from the teachers? But those decisions have to be made before you go out into the universe and talk about it. It really, really, really helps if you've got the support of the teachers before you launch all this thing, because, okay, before I move on to the next thing though, did that semi-answer your question? Okay, because one of the real challenges is scheduling the mediation sessions themselves. If it's the elementary school kids and it's at recess, you would think that would be pretty straightforward, but the challenge is is that the kids don't all go out on the same time usually on most campuses, and there's mixtures of grades that go out. So one of the challenges, and when you're picking, this is one thing I didn't mention, when you're picking mediators, one of the considerations that just put in the back of your head, obviously life isn't perfect, but one of the considerations is that mediators are usually very reluctant to offer their services to peers who are older than they are. So the chances of a 4th grade mediation team feeling comfortable to offer their services to a 5th grade couple of disputants during recess is probably close to 0. The 4th graders will be reluctant to do it. The 5th graders will look down their nose and go, really, 4th graders, you think I'm going to listen to you? So the age thing can make a difference, especially for the elementary school things. So that's a consideration when you're thinking about picking and choosing and deciding when mediations might take place. It's really funny because when I started out, scheduling mediations during recess was not a major production because all the kids went out at the same time and it was not like a major production. But we just seems to get fancier and fancier and more exotic. So there's a lot of divided recess times now in the various elementary schools, which makes actually scheduling mediators tricky. Now, for the middle school and the high school, there's also scheduling mediation challenges. Do you have the kids, the disputants, and I'm referring to the students who have the problems with disputants. And a side note, there's also discussion within the mediation field as to whether the term disputants is appropriate or not. I can assure you, those of you, if you're all involved in mediation in some way, if you want to be in a group that's always arguing, well, I shouldn't say arguing, discussing options, spend time with the mediation group. we are not conflict free either. So I'm going to refer to the kids though as disputants, so I hope that doesn't offend anybody. For the middle school and the high school, scheduling the mediations are challenging. The 2 disputants aren't necessarily don't have necessarily the same class schedule. To try to pair them up with an appropriate team of mediators is also challenging. But that's something that if the school wants to implement a peer mediation program, that's one of the practical considerations they're going to have to take into consideration. When will the mediation take place? Example, one of the middle schools that I worked with actually got permission from the teachers and all to schedule the mediations during various class times. Well, that didn't last very long in terms of the teachers being cooperative about that. It didn't last very long at all. So the program needed to back up and rethink it, started scheduling the mediations during lunch. The counselor was laughing because the counselor said to me, we went from mediations taking 45 minutes or the full length of the class time to taking about 10 minutes during lunch. So when they were scheduled at lunch. So we all got a laugh out of that, but that's a consideration. And as I said, I don't mean to sound like the old crabby lady upstairs, but unfortunately, it comes down to some of these detail things that you need to work very closely with the teachers and the counselors on to be sure that the kids can see. So let me see if there's real quick, if there's something else that I wanted to. Oh, okay. One of the other things that has come up an awful lot lately, especially with the whole social media phenomena, is the written records. You can have to make decisions with the schools as to whether or not there's going to be written records of the mediations. For the young kids, obviously, we're not talking long forms, but it's mention of who the 2 kids are, what the basic problem was, and what they, hopefully, if they reach some kind of a decision, capturing the solution they came up with. So what happens to those forms after they're all done? Same with the middle school and the high school. Their completion of forms of what happened in the mediation will probably be a lot longer and have more detail and information. My very, very, very strong, totally unequivocal recommendation is that those written documents do not be distributed to the students who are involved in the conflict, that they be given back to the counselor or the person who's organizing the program and not be burned or anything, and be kept and maintained, but not available for people just to come in and take a look. Now, if a disputant after a few weeks has forgotten exactly what they had agreed to do, and they want to come in and double check, then with the counselor present, then they can double check that. but it's extremely important that the privacy of the people, which of course is so funny that I'm saying that, because the mediations for little kids are taking place outside during recess when everybody's watching them. But we really need to work about the whole privacy thing so that we can try to cut down on the gossip and all. The other element, of course, is social media now. And I'm not saying that shaking fingers, but we need to be very, very clear in the evaluation or the decisions that get made, particularly for the middle school and the high school, that references get made to social media, and that the kids, the disputants, commit to not spreading all around or extending gossip and all about what happened during the mediation. We seem to do, kids don't have a strong definition of privacy to begin with. And the whole social media now basically has said to everybody, there's no such thing as privacy anymore, okay? But I would like to stress that as we do the training of the kids these days, we really stress the privacy part of it to the degree that the kids can actually do it. The more we can cut down on the gossip, the more likely it is that the two disputants who were sitting there are actually going to be able to do what they had agreed to do. The other aspect of the privacy is that there's a huge push in the adult mediation conflict management world to videotape these mediations, particularly the secondary school ones. You all may have some opinions about that, which I absolutely respect, but I'll be real clear about mine is, forget that. Absolutely not. There should be videotaping of secondary school mediation sessions. I think what sometimes people forget is that technically all of the kids in elementary, middle, and high school are all, they are not legal adults. And there's no question that their parents are still legally responsible for those kids. So even if two disputants sit there and say, oh yeah, let's videotape it and we'll put it up on TikTok. No, that if you want to have the conflict remain manageable, have the solution remain manageable, we really need to work to keep this social media part of it as controlled as we can. But just so that you know, there's a huge push by adult mediators to have the kids' mediations videotaped, video conferenced. Really? Yeah, so I don't, you all may have different opinions about that. And if you want to share something that's a little different from that, please feel free to, but that's something I'm absolutely passionate about. I just can't imagine that will help anything, anywhere, to have social media become part then of the resolution or management process. So are there any questions or comments that anybody wants to make so far? We all good? Yes, ma'am.
So yeah, I agree. I agree that it shouldn't be videotaped or recorded that in that sense. The only logical reason for someone wanting to do that is probably maybe to make a study of, but the thing is that's beyond the scope of what we're actually trying to do. We're trying to, solve a problem between two parties or more and not have it embedded, the problem.
Well, no, and thank you, Tanya. Oh, yes, Rita.
I think confidentiality is the heart of mediation in a way. And if the kids don't feel like they're going to have confidentiality, that kills the program. It's going to kill it. And actually, I trained kids in January of 2018 in my high school. So it's only 500 kids in the school. Well, at that time it was 400. And so I knew everybody. And it was decided by the administration that we weren't going to launch the program because there wasn't enough trust level amongst the students in the school. And so what we did instead was we started, we had an advisory program, but we really kind of amped up the talking circles, which as a restorative justice person, I do that too, to try to build social emotional learning and more of a trust level between the kids. And we haven't gotten back to the mediation part, because we've been involved with trying to become an anti-racist school, and COVID. So, but yeah, I haven't forgotten mediation, and I sure hope that we can have that happen because of all the things you said, Susan. It empowers the kid.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there. Obviously, all the programs, the programs that you were talking about too, mediation have tremendous value. And don't misunderstand me. Just because I'm an absolute shrill advocate for peer mediation doesn't mean that I don't appreciate and recognize the value of other programs. I do, absolutely. I think one of the things that I have enjoyed about mediation and why I stick with it rather than moving on to other things, well, for one thing, I feel comfortable that I know what I'm doing and teaching it, for one thing. But for another thing, I think that it offers a modeling of very practical ways that you can deal and address the conflicts that you have in front of you. And I have learned a lot from working with the third graders, to be honest with you. I think those third graders, the time that I spent with third graders have taught me a huge amount, that sometimes discussions don't have to be really, really involved. They don't have to take forever. And maybe what you can do is figure out a way to move forward. And if you can just figure out a way to move forward for the next 15 minutes, maybe you can move forward for another week, and maybe we can figure out something permanent. But that is very pragmatic. And the value of the mediation is that you've got kids modeling it. Now, if you've got the kind of energy and commitment from school to be going, taking on another program and going another direction, that's awesome. For me, the underlying thing is I just want the kids to feel that they have some choices and options for dealing with their conflicts other than what I touched on at the very beginning. I did an anti-bullying curriculum at the request of one of the schools I'd worked with forever and a day. And I learned a tremendous amount from that. And one of the things I learned from that, from the kids, I don't know if the kids learned anything from me, but I sure learned a lot from the kids, is that there's a lot more choices for dealing with conflicts that come up than we tend to think about. And that if we just spend a little more time to take a breath, step back, take a breath and think about it, we might be able to figure out a way to deal with the situation. Okay, so thank you for your comment there, the two of you. Yes, Melania?
Yeah, aloha, Susan, nice to meet you and everyone here. I wanted just to share that, this notion of teaching, anti-racism or bullying, or I'd love you to comment on the fact that, there we are again in education, kind of siloing things, when in fact, we just talked about values, about, compassion and care and things that refer to everything and help these young ones. Cause, like you say, third grade, they're perfection, they're so brilliant. They're so able to process and offer things to each other. I mean, I just feel that school is the biggest problem. The structural aspect of school, which doesn't make the teachers feel good when I say that, by the way, but it's just that notion of helping them not to see these things siloed. You're not a bully necessarily by yourself. It's because your dad might beat you, or, somebody down the street is, threatens you because of your size. I mean, there are reasons for it all. And maybe you could share a little bit more how this notion of integration really should be part of our larger conversations,
okay, I'm sorry. I really like your choice of the visual about silo. That's right on point. And you're putting it much more succinctly than I do, to be honest with you. That silo approach. And that's one of the, even apart from my comments about the bullying and the integration and all the larger issues there, that's one of the challenges, that regardless of what program you want to implement in the school, there is that silo thinking of programs, and rather than across the board, all school, all district, all state, whatever the content is. There is this silo thinking in okay, so if we do this, that will accomplish this. If we implement that, that will accomplish this, rather than across the board. So I absolutely agree with you To me, the ideal would be that we have a very cross topic curriculum available for the kids for all the things that you folks are touching on, fairness and equality and all the things that are in the front page now these days, with the idea of we are all part of one community and this is my bias. My bias is that the underlying theme for all of that is that we're one community, whether we like it or not. We are all one community. And if we can figure out some ways that will accommodate our differences, but recognize where we're similar, and we can figure out a way to deal with the differences when they come up, then that to me is awesome. That's the goal. So I really like your notion of silo. I'm going to steal that. I hope you don't mind. I just think that's really awesome. That's a very good way of putting it, because that's exactly how we, not just schools, but we tend to think of things. So that to me would be the ideal. And then the peer mediation program would fit into that, because and in some situations in the past, that's exactly what it's done, is a way to model what it is that you're talking about in the larger perspective, about your feelings, about what a community is, about fair play and all that kind of stuff. That if you've got a peer mediation curriculum that is not just necessarily transformative, but is also very practical focused, then the kids have a chance to actually practice some of the things that the issues that you're talking about and that Bree's talking about. I agree. And I absolutely agree. And I think probably most of us who are talking about peer mediation have that same kind of orientation to begin with, or we wouldn't be thinking about dealing with the kids like this. But yeah, no, I agree. To me, the idea, one of the fun, ideal things that happened at one point is that one of the districts here decided to implement a specific social skills program across their entire district. Well, I guess it was a complex. I shouldn't get carried away here. The entire complex. So they were all speaking the same social skills kinds of awareness language. They also decided to implement peer mediation programs across the entire complex, so that kids from kindergarten up through 12th grade in that particular complex, and it tended to be a fairly stable population. There wasn't a lot of kids coming in and out, got exposed to this kind of thing, these kinds of thoughts and directions and practical considerations right from the get-go. And to me, that was always like maybe the ideal to shoot for. Yeah. Because the other thing I want to add here too, and I don't mean to sound like I think I'm borderline preaching. Sorry. Maybe I am borderline preaching. Maybe I'm not borderline. Maybe I'm just full on preaching here. Okay. I think one of the things that I have noticed, my own upbringing, my children's upbringing, my work the last 30 years in the various schools and stuff, both public and private, is that we have a fair degree of clarity in a number of areas about how we're supposed to be as human beings, but we don't always provide the practical consideration how we can go about doing that. What does that mean then in a day-to-day thing? Because I think the one extreme that you hear from individual people is that the strongest survives, and what are you teaching the kids all this stuff for? Because whoever's the strongest gets to make the decisions. What's the challenge here? To the other extreme, which is the whole transformative notion that we should all love each other and get along. I respect the two extremes. What I would like to see more emphasis is some skills that kids can learn to figure out some very practical ways of dealing with these very heavy duty emotional issues. One example, and then I'll move on. I hope I'm not boring all of you guys to death here. One example of what I'm talking about. When I did the anti-bullying thing, which I have to point out, and I'm sure all of you who've been involved in the schools have noticed, the silo effect. The anti-bullying emphasis served the purpose of pretty much killing peer mediation in an awful lot of different areas, because there was a feeling that it couldn't be compatible. that if there was anything that bordered on teasing, old school teasing or bullying, it got sent to the vice principal and it needed to be disciplined. There had to be discipline that occurred. Okay, I get that. But when you start labeling third graders as bullies and third graders as victims, I'm not sure how hopeful in the long run that is.
Yeah.
So one example for my anti-bullying thing, and then I'll move this along a little bit here. One of the activities that I had the kids do was after we'd had some preliminary discussion and this and that and this and that, they labeled a bully, and it was all very confidential. Nobody else in the class saw it. It was all absolutely private. And then part of the activity was that they worked out a plan of action for dealing with that bully.
Mm.
We generated out of fourth and fifth graders, we generated 2 single-spaced pages of possible ways to deal with the bully. And one of the things that just absolutely touched my heart was that as I was leaving one of the classrooms, the little boy came running out and he looked up at me and he said, Miss Sue, can I tell you about my bully? Of course. My bully is my older brother. And my dad tells me that I should just tough it out and deal with it. I can't. So I said, so what have you decided to do? What do you do? I go out in the front yard and I sit in my swing and I hold my dog. And after 15 or 20 minutes, I'm okay. And then I go back in the house. Okay, we don't have enough of those kinds of conversations. I'm not saying to run out the front yard and hold your dog, but what I'm saying is we don't have enough of those conversations to encourage kids to think of some practical ways of dealing with it. What if your bully's the teacher? You're not going to go tell another teacher, another adult on campus that you're the bully in your life right now is the teacher. So one of the things that I would hope that we would continue to work on is recognizing that there can be a lot of practical solutions. Well, not practical, and I don't mean warm and fuzzy necessarily, but some practical solutions and encourage them. So, which is one reason I like the peer mediation thing, because the mediators are not out there with the idea of telling you exactly one way to solve it. I mean, they're talking about fair play and all that kind of thing, but they're not giving you one thing to do. And leaving it to the disputant to kind of think through what they're going to feel comfortable doing. And there's a lot of beauty to that. Okay, no, I'm rambling on here. Is there something that you?
Yes, and I just want to let you know, Andrea has had her hand up for a little bit, and
oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
And then we are getting close to time, so we probably have like another 5 minutes. So I'll let Andrea go.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry,
Yeah, no,
Andrea. Sorry, I'm sorry.
No, we can ignore my hand. I actually, you answered it. You answered it because my question was right around the same time when you started talking about how there was like more of a social skill implemented. My question was, has there been programs where you implemented something that was either an elective or something that was kind of visited at certain times of the year, and then the outgrowth of that is peer mediation? But you touched on that a little bit, and it's a sidetrack. So no, thank you for that.
Well, no, and actually, I'm absolutely an advocate for what you're just talking about too, in terms of the questioning and stuff, because if the peer mediation program stands all by itself, it doesn't have context. If it can be part of some kind of, whatever it is that is, whether it's restorative justice or whether it's basic social skills or whatever it is, but it's a way to actually practice out fair play, conflict management, then it really helps if there's a context and the kids are used to maybe they haven't absorbed all of it, but they're already used to thinking in terms of how feelings impact and what fair play is, and we're part of a larger community and that kind of thing. That can help. Otherwise, if it's really raw, then the peer
something that makes it
harder.
more part of.
Yes, exactly. If I ruled the world, Andrea, that's what I would do. Yes, that would be a way to model out the larger thing. Okay. Okay, so Jose, what are we doing then, sir, in terms of?
Well, I would say we're at 2:50 right now. So if we want to, I don't know if you have any closing thoughts. I would say we probably have another like maybe 2-3 minutes because we do have another event starting in.
Okay, no, I'll let me just
Yeah.
circle full circle. First of all, thank you all for being here. Hopefully, thank you for putting up with me. You know, once you press the on button, it's really hard to find the pause or off button. Okay, as you may have noticed, I do have the formal paper, and if anybody would like to email me and request a copy, I'm more than happy to provide that. At the end is a cartoon that I use from the Quakers called The Tale of Two Donkeys, which I dearly love, and I don't care what the ages of the people that I'm training. I use that cartoon all the time. The other thing that's listed in the challenges is a YouTube presentation, Everyday Conflicts, Creative Solutions, the CRU Institute put together several years ago, and it shows an elementary school peer mediation session. And one of the reasons I love that little video section, the video itself is much longer, but I love that little section, is that it captures the rhythm of a peer mediation program, a peer mediation, and how it can go. Obviously, the mediations that take place at middle school and high school tend to be more full-on relationship issues. But in terms of like catching the flavor of how a peer mediation might go, that little video is like awesome. I show that all the time too. It doesn't have to be long, drawn out and painful. Maybe sometimes it can be short and sweet and to the point and we can move on. So thank you guys very, very much. And take care. Mediate on, okay?
Thank you very much.
Love it.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank
Okay,
you,
well, thank
Sue.
you, all of you. Hang in there, you guys.
Thank you, Susan.
so much.
Aloha.
Thank you, Susan. I greatly appreciate you just taking the time and just I just want to say a few words. Thank you, Susan, just for providing such amazing knowledge and what you've learned over your time, and just such insights into peer mediation and your approach as a conflict resolver, just your passion and kindness and all that you do. So thank you so much for just being with us today. And I feel like we should do a follow-up. we'll talk like and see. Maybe it might be next year then. keep people coming back. But last but not least, I do want to thank everybody else who joined today's webinar. We deeply appreciate your interest and support in joining us to learn about peer mediation programs throughout Hawaii at the 34th Annual Peer Mediation Conference, Adventures in Peer Mediation.